Welcome. We're so glad you're here this morning. I do want to say, before we get started, I want us to make sure that we remember the people in Texas and pray for them, all that they're going through. I can't even imagine. My wife, as soon as she heard the news, she hollered at me from the other room. She goes, "Hey, where are our kids at camp?" And because we knew they were in Texas, I said, "They're 300 miles away. We're good." But a lot of families didn't have that. They did have that grief that they're experiencing, not only the loss, but those that don't know where they are. But I do want to give you a little bit of perspective on God. It was yesterday afternoon before I heard this, but did you know that camp in Texas, there were 750 people at that camp? And did you know that I heard yesterday afternoon that 700 people were rescued from that camp? So it's like, I mean, I'm not diminishing. Please don't hear me diminishing the fact that there are people that are grieving today, and we pray for all of them. I also want to acknowledge that God is good. And he has, all those people matter to him. And so anyway, we want to continue to pray for them. I know some of you parents, I don't know if you had those thoughts that Charlotte had when your kids were down at that camp. So anyway, great opportunity for us to lift up these families in prayer. So make sure you do that today and continue that. But we are continuing our series on the life of Paul. We're in Acts chapter 17. Acts chapter 17. Do you guys ever look at our culture? You look at the condition of our world and you ask yourself the question, could it get any worse? You look and you're like, could it get any worse? I mean, and how in the world can we as followers of Christ impact our culture? How in the world can we impact our culture for Jesus? The Apostle Paul, in the text that we're in, he is living in what I would call a pre-Christian culture. Okay, or at least the very early infant stages of Christianity, right? So there's a lot of things that he faced. I've made this argument the last few weeks. I'm going to make it again today. I think we are living in a post-Christian culture. You can debate with me on that. That's fine. I'll explain some things about it today. And so how can we, like Paul impacted his pre-Christian culture, how can we impact our post-Christian culture? Here's the differences I found between pre-Christian culture and post-Christian. The religious culture of a pre-Christian world was predominantly characterized by polytheistic religions and pagan practices. What's that mean? It means Greek mythology, lots of gods. Most of them believed in multiple gods. We still have some of that today, but Paul was dealing with that kind of stuff. He was also dealing with various forms of nature worship and animism, which basically means that everything in the world has a soul. So everything in the world is God. I mean, it's that kind of a thing. They were dealing with a lot of that in pre-Christian culture. In the post-Christian culture that we live in, I believe, see if this describes us today. While Christianity may still exist, which it does, it is no longer the dominant force shaping public life. Secularism, atheism, and other belief systems have taken center stage, okay? Let's go back to pre-Christian. In pre-Christian culture, societies were often structured around tribal affiliations, local deities, and rituals connected to the natural world. We still have a little bit of that today with the tribalism. We just don't call it tribalism, but we like to group up and tribe up with people who are like us, and that was how societies were formed. In a post-Christian culture, societies often exhibit a decline in religious practices, a question of traditional Christian values, and a greater emphasis on individual autonomy and secular practices. Okay? Now, ethics and morals. In a pre-Christian culture, ethics and morals look like this. They were tied to specific cultural norms and traditions with varying degrees of emphasis on social harmony and individual conduct. Does that sound familiar? Post-Christian's not a whole lot different. In the post-Christian world, moral frameworks may shift toward relativism, which means that you just decide what's right in your own eyes and then you just do it. Individualism and a focus on human rights and social justice, sometimes drawing inspiration from Christian ethics, but often redefining them. Now, again, we can debate this. This is just my opinion, but I think we do live in a post-Christian culture. Paul was dealing with a pre-Christian culture. Here's the whole point for me bringing this up, because I believe that what Paul did can help us today. How he was trying to impact his pre-Christian culture is just as effective, I believe, today in our post-Christian culture. We can look at our culture, we can look at our world and say, oh, everything's just going to hell in a handbasket. You know, everything's bad, and we just retreat to our house, or we retreat to our churches and our Christian bubble and say we're not going to do anything. Or we can say it matters to me the condition of our world, and I want to do something to change it. I want to do something to impact and influence it. So as we come to our text today in Acts chapter 17, Paul continues to show, and I've showed this over the last few weeks, he continues to show his heart, his vision, and his strategy for how to make disciples. And that is our mission, by the way, to make disciples. As we go to make disciples. And Paul continues to show it. A couple weeks ago, we talked about how by sharing the gospel with people in their context and in relationship with them, we can turn the world right side up. Last week, we talked about truth and how we communicate truth, and it matters not just that we communicate truth, but that how we do it, speaking the truth in love, matters if we're going to impact our culture. And today, we're going to look at another strategy, how we can impact this post-Christian culture. Pick up with me with verse 16. Paul has been waiting in Athens for Timothy and Silas. He sent for them. Here's what it says. While Paul was waiting for them, Timothy and Silas, in Athens, he was deeply distressed. This word's not in English, but his heart was deeply distressed when he saw that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and with those who worshiped God, as well as in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. I love that. Verse 18, some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers also debated with him. Some said, what is this ignorant show-off trying to say? Others replied, he seems to be a preacher of foreign deities because he was telling the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. So let's talk about Athens for a minute. Let's throw the map up here and we can see where we're at. He's traveled from Philippi. He traveled down to Thessalonica. He traveled to Berea. That's where he left from last week. In the middle of the night, he escaped and he came down and he took some people believe he took a ship. Other people believe that he went by land. But he got down to Athens in southern Greece. And that's where he's at. Well, this is a city that may be more familiar to us in our Western world because we know a little bit more about it. Some of the pictures I may show you may look familiar to you. But what do we know about Athens? Athens was credited with developing the concept of democracy. It was a place where they developed this idea that people should participate in decision making. It was the birthplace of philosophers like Plato, Socrates, Aristotle. It attracted people like that. It attracted scholars. It attracted artists. It was an architectural, innovative place. And so it was a place that was very intellectual. It had a vibrant intellectual and cultural scene. And this is the kind of place that Paul was at. It was a very strategic place for him to go. And he was here waiting. What's he waiting for? Well, he's waiting for these two guys to show up. But he wasn't content just to wait. Why? Because, and we'll find this out next week as we look at his speech that he gives. But he was walking around the city, and what did he see? He saw temples and idols. If you know anything about Athens, that's what Athens is. It's a place filled with temples and idols and places where pantheism, lots of gods. He walked around and he saw this, and it says, Luke tells us that his heart was distressed. It was stirred up. He was not happy about what was going on because he saw this place was full of idols. Well, what is idolatry? What is idolatry? Idolatry is something, this is how I define it. It's the worship of someone or something other than God as if they were God. It's a worship of someone or something other than God as if they were God or they had a position in your heart or in your life as God. It's anything that captures our heart so much that it becomes our identity. It becomes a non-negotiable. I will not give this up no matter what. That's what idolatry is. Is idolatry wrong? I know that seems like an obvious question. Yes, idolatry is wrong. Look at what the Bible says. Exodus chapter 20, the 10 Commandments starts out this way. Do not have other gods besides me. Do not make an idol for yourself, whether in the shape of anything in the heavens above, or on the earth below, or in the waters under the earth. Do not bow down and worship to them, and do not serve them. It was not God's will that we would have other things in the place of Him. So idolatry is obviously something that God doesn't want in our life, and Paul knows that, and so he goes to 3 places. Well, 2 places, and then encounters some different people. He goes into the Jewish synagogue. There's a shocker, right? He goes to Jewish synagogue, and he encounters the Jews there, but he also encounters those who worship God, probably God-fearing Greeks and Gentiles. Why does this matter? Here's what I think Paul's doing. I think that Paul is distressed that this city is full of idols, and yet there's a Jewish synagogue sitting right there, a place of worship of God, and they're allowing this to happen. My question to you is this: is it much different today? Because we have houses, we're in Oklahoma. Drive down the road. How many churches are you going to find? How many places of worship are you going to find? And yet we sit back sometimes and just allow the condition of our world to continue. Now, I understand. I'm going to make this case in just a minute. I believe that we're approaching it wrongly, trying to impact our culture. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But we have to first have this heart like Paul did, that we are not going to be content. We're not going to be okay with things staying the way they are in our culture. It's one thing to see it, but if we just come to our churches and sit here in our bubble and act like, it's not, we'll just let them go to hell. It doesn't matter. So Paul was upset, and so he goes to these places and he addresses this with the people there who worship God. But then I love this. He went to the marketplace. What's the marketplace? The marketplace was the place where people hung out. It's the place that's the social center of the town, of the city, and that's where people hung out. So he went to the marketplace to see who happened to be there. In the 80s, when I was growing up, that was the mall. Not so much anymore, right? I don't know where you guys hang out now. We either used to go to the mall or we used to drive up and down the street and staring, waving at people. And it's called cruising. If some of you people are with me, young people going, I don't know what you're talking about. It's a waste of gas, but it was fun. But you go where people were, right? You go where people are, and that's what Paul did. He went to them, and it says that he reasoned with them. What's he saying? Well, we already know what he's saying because of what they said later, so I'll tell you now. He's telling him about Jesus and about the resurrection. He's telling him who Jesus is. And so he went to the synagogue to find the religious people and say, what are you guys going to do about this? He went to the marketplace to begin to try to convince people one by one by one by one who Jesus is and what Jesus was going to do for them. And he ran into these guys. It says he debated these philosophers, Epicureans and Stoics. Now, I know you're going, who are those people? I'm going to tell you, those people still exist today. They just don't use that name. I'm going to give you a real quick version of who these people are. The Epicureans were people who did not believe that your body went anywhere after you died. So basically, there was no soul, and when you died, that's it. And you just go away. Here's what else they believed. They believed the highest form of life would be to find as much pleasure as you can find. Does that sound like anybody today? Find as much pleasure as you can find. Go chase it. Do everything you can. Just party, 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 party. Find as much pleasure as you can and avoid as much pain as you can. Does that sound familiar? We spend all our money and all of our time trying to avoid sickness and death. And so an Epicurean was somebody who would try to find as much pleasure and as little pain as possible. And they just live their lives. Eat, drink, be merry, for tomorrow you'll die. That's the way Epicureans were. Stoics were the opposite. Now, Stoics didn't believe in a transcendent God. They didn't believe in this figure of a God. They believed that the God was the universe. I don't know, I guess it's just this ether or something going out, right? The God was the universe, and so when you die, somehow your body just morphs into this universe and you become part of God. Here's the opposite, how they were the opposite of Epicureans. I had to read this like 5 times to see if I was reading it right. Stoic people believed that the highest form of morality was apathy. The highest form of morality was apathy. So what did they do? Well, you can't chase pleasure because that's not going to bring you anything, which is somewhat true. But so they would not chase any pleasure. And if pain is in your life, that's just the lot you have to bear. Sound familiar? There are people just like that today as well. Now, here's the thing for me about Stoics. If you didn't believe there was anything after this life, why live that kind of life? That seems kind of useless, right? But so these are the people that Paul is encountering. It's going to mean a little bit more later, but just remember, he's talking about resurrection to these people that don't believe anything happens after we die. So he's talking about this, and so what do? They call him ignorant and a show-off. They call him ignorant and a show-off. This word show-off means a foolish babbler, one who cannot put a cohesive, rational argument together. That's what they called him. And that would have been an insult in their town. It wasn't to Paul necessarily. Paul was a lot smarter than me, but I don't think that bothered him as much as it would have bothered me probably. So they also called him a preacher of foreign or strange gods. But they weren't talking about God. They were talking about pagan deities. Let me tell you something else about Epicureans and Stoics. They didn't believe in the pagan gods either. They just didn't believe it. They were very secular, and so they had all these views, but they didn't believe in gods, whether they were pagan or Greek mythology or our God. They didn't believe any of that stuff. And so here he is engaging these people. So he goes to the religious people and says, "What are you guys doing?" He goes to the marketplace and says, "Hey, let me tell you some truths about who Jesus is." And in the middle of that, he meets these philosophers, these smart people, and he begins to engage them in a healthy debate. Why did he do that? What was his strategy for impacting his pre-Christian culture for Christ, and how can that help us? First of all, he never turned off his mission. Paul was waiting for his friends to show up, but he never stopped being on mission. I know I'm taking a chance here, but I want to say something. I've already said this over the last 9 months several times. I'm going to say it again. I know that our church went through something really, really hard. We're still going through it. I know that there's grief in that process. But can I tell you something? Number one, this church is not leaderless, and I'm not talking about myself. And I'm not even talking about our elders. This church continues to have the same leader it had before. And it continues to have the same mission that it had before. And if we're sitting back waiting for the next guy to show up and tell us what our marching orders are, we're missing the whole boat, because the mission will never change. The mission is to make disciples as we go. That is our mission. It's always been our mission. It always will be our mission. And Paul knew that about himself, because the mission is not for Summit Church. The mission is not for an organization called Summit Church. The mission is for the people of our church, because it's the same mission for us that it is for every other person out there that follows Christ. And we can never sit back and go, "Well, I'm just going to wait." The mission has to continue. We always have to be engaging. Why? Because God sends us to people and places that He doesn't send other people to. I love up here in Oklahoma City seeing all you young people, right? God is sending you to people that would never sit down and have coffee with me. He's sending every one of us to people that other people aren't being sent to. And He's sending us to places that other people aren't being sent to. And the mission has to continue if we're willing to accept it and do what God has called us to do. Right? And so not only was Paul never turned off his mission, he also was a student of those people and places God sent him to. We're going to talk a little bit more about this next week. But Paul was always learning about these people. Paul was always learning about the places where God was sending him. And people sit around and they say, "Oh, I don't have time. I don't have time." Guess what? We all have time. We all have the same amount of time. And the question is, are we learning about these people and how we can greater make an impact? If we don't accept that our culture is the way it is, and we continue to try to impact the world the way we used to try to impact the world, we will have no effect on the world, because the world has changed. And we have to continually be learning who people are. The message hasn't changed. The gospel, the good news of Jesus has not changed. It never will. But our culture continues to change, and so Paul did that. That was part of his strategy. Paul was also not content. Paul was not content that his world was the way it was. And I said this a while ago, and I'll say it again. Are you content to just sit in our Christian bubble and not make an impact on the world? I've been guilty. Very, very, very guilty. I just want to go home. I just want to go home after church. I want to go to church. God, did you see me? All right, we're good. I worshiped him. I sang. I want to go home. And if you're a baseball fan, I apologize up front. But right now, there's not any sports that I care to watch. All right? If you do, that's fine. So I don't go home and, pull up games, but I used to, during the certain seasons I do. But I'll go home and just veg out on Netflix. And then I say I don't have time. I don't have time to try to impact the world. We have to realize that the world is dying and going to hell. And not only are we sitting back, but we've participated in the same idolatry as them. Look at what Paul says in Romans chapter 1. He's talking about the Romans, but I think it applies to us. He says, "For though they knew God, they did not glorify him as God or show gratitude. Instead, their thinking became worthless, and their senseless hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man, birds, four-footed animals, and reptiles." Now, I know what you're saying. I don't have idols in my house. Let me ask you a question. How do you feel about athletes? How do you feel about superstars? We have a show called American Idol. Now, I watch it. I'm not saying it's a bad show, but the name kind of bothers me a little bit. We're taking these people and going, these are idols. We're going to make them bigger than they are. I'm so happy, and if you have your shirt or your hat on, great. I'm so happy the Thunder won 17 years, right? Yay, we can celebrate. It's awesome. I'm so glad some of you guys went out and celebrated on the street, right? And I did not go because I thought it was wrong. I did not go because I didn't want to mess with the crowd. So I'm going to tell you that up front, right? Nothing wrong with doing that. You know how much some people, and maybe in this room, I'm not, no shade on you. You know how much money people spent to go to those games? Right? And then we say we don't have idols. But we throw our money and we throw our praise and we throw our accolades to these people. And again, I'm celebrating too. Don't get me wrong. We take money and we take material possessions and we make them our idol. They're our God. You want me to prove that to you? How many hours a week do you work? And if you didn't have to live the lifestyle that you currently live, how many hours would you need to work? Okay, again, I'm not trying to make it. I'm just saying we've contributed. This one's going to hurt a little bit. We have taken political figures and political ideologies and we made them gods too. We've made these people and these ideologies our God, and we spend all this time worshiping. You say, no, we don't. Look at social media. Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do. Could go on. We've even made religion and theological positions idols and gods in our life. So we've got to not be content with the condition of our world, and we definitely have to stop participating in it. Paul was not afraid of healthy debate, and he was always communicating the good news of the gospel. Look at verse 19, because Paul had a curious response. Remember what usually happens? Paul does this in a town, and what happens? He gets stoned, he gets arrested, he gets thrown out, right? One of those three things usually happens. Look at what happens. They took him. The word, by the way, took actually means arrested him, so hear that as you continue to hear this. They took him and brought him to the Areopagus. And they said, may we learn about this new teaching you are presenting? Because what you say sounds strange to us, foreign to us. And we want to know what these things mean. And now all the Athenians and the foreigners residing there spent their time on nothing else but telling or hearing something new. They took him, they arrested him, they brought him to the Areopagus. The word Areopagus actually means hill of Ares. Ares was known as the god of war in Greek culture. The Romans called him Mars. So this is either the hill of Ares, Areopagus, or Mars Hill. And so this is the place. I have a couple pictures here that will show you what it looks like. So this one right here is the steps leading up to the Areopagus. The Areopagus was actually not just a place. It was actually a council of leaders and rulers. And what they would do on this hill, go to the next, this is a picture of what the hill looks like today. Doesn't look like much, but there used to be a building there that was like a official court, a place where they discussed religion, they discussed law. In fact, some people think that Ares was actually tried for killing Poseidon's son. He was tried on this hill where Paul was standing. And so this is the place that Paul was taken to. And it doesn't look the same, but they took him up the steps to this court-like place. And so I have a rendering here in a minute I'll show you. But look what was this was in the shadow of the Acropolis. Now, this may look familiar to some of you. There's another picture here. The Acropolis was a place with a bunch of temples to other gods. The Parthenon is here. So if you're familiar with Athens at all. And so this was up above where this hill that Paul was on, okay? Now go to this rendering because you can kind of see over here in the left bottom corner, you see a building someone drew, and this might have been, that's the hill, the Areopagus, where Paul was at, and there was kind of a court-like building, and then you can see up above it the Acropolis where these temples were at. And so this is where he was taken. He was taken to court, but not to be tried. Kind of, but not really. They were asking the question, tell us more. Now, I know what you're saying. In your life, you have people in your life that are far from God. And in your mind, you're thinking, well, they don't ever ask me to tell them more about God. Do they not? Now, some do. Some overtly will ask you. But you know what a lot of times it looks like? They'll call you and tell you how things are going bad in their life. They'll call you and tell you of something they're struggling with. And you have the answer. You have the answer. And yet it's so easy not to hear that. Again, remember, culture is changing. In that culture, they wanted to know about everything new. And they wanted to know about all the stuff that was going on. And so they were asking the right questions, and we see that and go, well, they don't ask that today. No, but they come to you. Your friends come to you. Your family comes to you, and they're struggling with something. And I realize we think that making disciples looks like this. I'm going to go down to the coffee shop. I'm going to meet some random stranger. I'm going to tell them about Jesus. We're going to pray right there. They're going to give their heart to Jesus. We're going to go down to the church. We're going to baptize them. Everything's good. That all happens in like 6 hours, right? Just so you know, that's not what it usually looks like. In fact, I was talking to our kids director in Norman this morning, and she was telling me about a friend of hers who she's been spending time with, and she's been talking to her about Jesus. And this person grew up in a certain faith, and then they walked away from that faith. And so they have a lot of questions, and they ask questions. And you know how long she's been a friend with this person? How long she's been having these conversations? 3 years. 3 years. My wife has a relationship that's lasted longer than that. And that person hadn't turned to Jesus yet. Is she not doing her job? No, she's still living out the mission. She's just investing in this person's life over and over and over again. So who are the people in your life that keep coming to you with issues and with problems? What they're doing is they're asking what these people are doing. Do you have an answer? Now, sometimes not. They're just wanting to talk, and that's fine. But are you aware enough and alert enough that these people might need you to share this new teaching? See, the problem is I think that for these people, this was a new teaching. For us, we've allowed the good news of Jesus to become old and stale. In our own minds. In our own minds, we're like, nobody wants to hear about this. It's just, they've heard about Jesus. Jesus went to the cross. He died. He raised from the dead. And we've made it old and stale instead of realizing that it's still fresh and it's still life-changing. If people will see life change in us because of what Jesus did for us, they might want what we have. But if we're just going around complaining about everything too, complaining about the world and all these people that are going to hell, and we're not investing in them. See, people are still curious today, and we have to go find them. As the band comes back up, let me wrap this up with this. How do we impact our culture? How do we impact our post-Christian culture? First of all, the condition of the world needs to matter to you just like it mattered to Paul. You have to have a heart, and we have to know that we have the answer. His name is Jesus. We have to realize that God's going to send us to places and people who need to be impacted with the good news of Jesus. And we got to continually be students of those people. And we got to never give up the mission and always be engaging them. We need to build relationships with these people and dialogue with them about the good news of Jesus. So a guy by the name of Jamal Roberts, he won American Idol this year. I told you I watch it, so I'm not trashing it, right? This guy had an incredible voice and has a really great love for Jesus and shares it. And a few weeks ago, he was in concert in Nashville. And in that concert, there's about 25,000 people at this concert, and he was singing, and he got done with the song. He's about halfway through his concert, through the set, and some anti-American chants began to cry out from the front rows. Now, I need to stop here before I finish the story and let you know this is not a we need to be more patriotic story, so hear me, all right? So these anti-American chants began to cry out from the front, and Jamal Roberts didn't start yelling at these people and tell them to stop. He didn't sit there and try to get in a debate with them and argue with them. He didn't walk off the stage and say, I give up. He just pulled his mic to his mouth, and he began to quietly sing God Bless America by himself, one single voice in a sea of 25,000 people. You know what happened next? One by one, people began to sing with him. And over the course of the next few moments, the chants that were crying out were drowned out and began to stop as this group of 25,000 people sang out. What's that mean for us? Again, I'm not talking anti-American, patriotic. That's not the point here. What would happen? See, because I think in our post-Christian world, we're trying so hard. We're trying so hard to change them, and we do it by yelling at them. We're doing it by being hateful to them. We do it by getting on social media and letting them know how terrible they are. We emphasize this sin on this sin and this sin from a platform instead of from a relationship. And we wonder why our world's not changing. What if one by one we just took the microphone and began to gently whisper the name of Jesus? What if people began to see in our hearts a gentle spirit as Jesus has changed us? I can't promise you our whole culture will change, because that's not what the Bible says is going to happen. But I can tell you one by one, we will change one person who will change another person who will change another person. And we will begin to see our culture impacted as the anti-Christian chants began to fade, not because we screamed at them till they stopped, because they saw the love of Jesus in us, and they wanted what we had. We're going to worship, and I pray that during this time you will just cry out to God and ask Him to change your heart so that you see the condition of the world, but you don't just say, I'm going to go out and I'm going to bulldoze people, but I'm going to go out and I'm going to gently whisper the name of Jesus, and I'm going to let them see Jesus in my life so that they can begin to change. And when that happens, church, you better hang on, because there's not enough buildings big enough to hold the number of people that will come to Jesus. I believe that with all my heart. Let's stand. Let's worship Him.